The autumn air was crisp as Kate Middleton stepped out of the sleek black car at Westminster Abbey. The cameras flashed like lightning, capturing every detail of her emerald green coat and the nervous smile she wore. Today was supposed to be a celebration, a moment of unity for the royal family as they attended the annual Commonwealth service together. William walked beside her, his military uniform pressed to perfection. He placed his hand gently on the small of her back as they approached the grand entrance. Kate felt the familiar warmth of his touch, a small comfort against the sea of reporters and curious onlookers who lined the path. "You look beautiful," William whispered into her ear as they paused for the official photographs. Kate's smile became more genuine, her shoulders relaxing slightly. After 12 years of marriage, he still had the power to calm her nerves with just a few words. Inside the abbey, the atmosphere was different. The stone walls seemed to absorb sound, creating an almost sacred silence. Kate could see other members of the royal family taking their seats in the front rows. King Charles nodded politely as they approached, while Queen Camilla sat beside him, her fingers drumming quietly on her handbag. Kate had always found Camilla difficult to read. There was something in the older woman's eyes that made her feel like she was constantly being measured, weighed against some invisible standard. Today, Camilla wore a deep blue dress with a pearl necklace that caught the light from the stained glass windows above. "Catherine, dear," Camilla said as they approached, her voice smooth as silk. "How lovely you look today." "Thank you, Camilla," Kate replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her stomach. She had learned over the years to navigate these interactions carefully, never quite sure where she stood with her stepmother-in-law. The service began with the sound of the organ filling the vast space. Kate found herself caught up in the music, the familiar hymns bringing back memories of her childhood church visits. She felt William's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. It was a small gesture, but one that grounded her in the moment. As they stood for the first hymn, Kate noticed how the light streamed through the windows, painting rainbow patterns on the ancient stones. She had always loved these moments of quiet reflection, even amid the formality of royal duties. There was something about being in a place of worship that made the pressures of public life fade away, if only temporarily. The Archbishop's voice echoed through the abbey as he spoke about unity and service. Kate listened intently, thinking about her own role in the monarchy and how much her life had changed since she first met William at university. Back then, she never could have imagined standing here, representing the crown before hundreds of people. During the second reading, Kate felt a slight shift in the atmosphere. She glanced sideways and noticed Camilla looking in her direction. But when their eyes met, the older woman quickly looked away. There was something in that brief moment that made Kate's stomach tighten with unease. The service continued without incident, but Kate couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface. She had learned to trust her instincts over the years, and right now, they were telling her to be careful. William seemed oblivious to any tension. His attention focused entirely on the ceremony before them. As they prepared to leave for the reception, Kate felt a mix of relief and anticipation. The formal part of the day was over, but now came the more challenging aspect, the social mingling, where every word and gesture would be scrutinized by both the media and other members of the royal family. The reception was held in a grand hall adjacent to the abbey. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the gathered dignitaries and royal family members. Kate moved through the crowd with practiced grace, making polite conversation with ambassadors and Commonwealth representatives. She was discussing environmental initiatives with the High Commissioner of Australia when she felt someone approach from behind. Turning, she saw Camilla walking toward her with a strange expression on her face. There was something different about her stepmother-in-law today, something that made Kate's protective instincts flare to life. "Catherine," Camilla said, her voice carrying a tone that Kate couldn't quite place. "I wonder if I might have a word with you." Kate excused herself from her conversation and followed Camilla to a quieter corner of the reception hall. The older woman's smile seemed forced, her eyes not quite meeting Kate's as she spoke. "I've been thinking about the upcoming events," Camilla began, her fingers playing with her pearl necklace. "The Christmas engagements, the New Year appearances. There are some changes that need to be made." Kate felt her heart begin to race. "What kind of changes?" "Well, Charles and I have been discussing your role, Camilla continued, her voice becoming sharper. We feel that perhaps you've been taking on too much lately. The children need their mother at home more often. The words hit Kate like a physical blow. She had worked so hard to establish herself as a valuable member of the royal team. To prove that she belonged here, the suggestion that she should step back felt like a rejection of everything she had accomplished. I don't understand, Kate said carefully, trying to keep her voice steady. My engagements have been very successful. The public response has been overwhelmingly positive. Camilla's smile became even more strained. Of course, dear. But we must think about what's best for the monarchy as a whole. Charles feels that a more traditional approach might be beneficial. Kate felt the color drain from her face. She understood exactly what Camilla was saying, even if the words were wrapped in royal politeness. This was about power, about hierarchy, about putting her back in her place. She looked around the room, desperate to catch William's eye, but he was deep in conversation with a group of military officials on the other side of the hall. I think, Kate said slowly, that any changes to my schedule should be discussed with William first. Camilla's expression hardened. William has quite enough to worry about, without being burdened by these details. This is a family matter, Catherine. I'm sure you understand the importance of family harmony. The threat was clear, even though it was never explicitly stated. Kate felt trapped, caught between her desire to stand up for herself and her need to maintain the delicate balance of royal relationships. She had worked too hard to build bridges within the family to burn them all down in one moment of anger. Of course, Kate replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Family harmony is very important. Camilla's smile returned, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'm so glad we understand each other, dear. Now, shall we rejoin the others? As they walked back toward the main group, Kate felt like she was moving through water. Everything seemed distant and unclear, as if she was watching the scene from outside her own body. She managed to smile and nod at the right moments. But inside, she was crumbling. When William finally appeared at her side, Kate had to resist the urge to grab onto his arm like a lifeline. His presence was comforting, but she couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed in those few minutes with Camilla. How are you holding up? William asked quietly, noticing the tension in her shoulders. Fine, Kate lied, pasting on her public smile. Just a bit tired. William studied her face for a moment, and she could see the concern growing in his eyes. But before he could ask any more questions, they were approached by another group of dignitaries. And the moment passed. As the afternoon wore on, Kate found herself watching Camilla more carefully. The older woman moved through the crowd with confidence, accepting congratulations and praise with grace. But every now and then, Kate caught her looking in her direction with that same unreadable expression. By the time they were preparing to leave, Kate felt emotionally exhausted. The confrontation with Camilla had shaken her more than she cared to admit, and she was grateful when William suggested they skip the final group photographs. Are you sure you're all right? William asked as they walked toward their car. You seem different somehow. Kate considered telling him everything, laying out the conversation with Camilla and her fears about what it might mean for her future role. But looking at his face, seeing the genuine concern there, she couldn't bring herself to add to his burdens. Just one of those days, she said instead, squeezing his hand. I'll be fine tomorrow. As their car pulled away from Westminster Abbey, Kate stared out the window at the familiar streets of London. She had no idea that this was just the beginning. That the confrontation with Camilla would escalate into something far more public and humiliating than she could have imagined. The seeds of conflict had been planted, and soon they would grow into something that would test not only her marriage but her very place within the royal family. The woman who had once been a commoner from Berkshire was about to face the greatest challenge of her royal life, and she would have to do it largely alone. That evening, as she tucked her children into bed, Kate tried to push the day's events from her mind. But Camilla's words echoed in her head, a constant reminder that her position in the family was far more precarious than she had ever imagined. The real battle was just beginning, and Kate had no idea how brutal it would become. The weeks following the Commonwealth service passed in a blur of carefully orchestrated public appearances and private tension. Kate threw herself into her remaining engagements with renewed determination, as if proving her worth through sheer force of will. She visited hospitals, attended charity galas, and met with community leaders, all while maintaining the perfect smile that had become her trademark. But behind closed doors at Kensington Palace, the atmosphere was different. William had noticed the change in his wife, the way she seemed to second-guess herself at every turn. When he asked about it, Kate deflected with talk of the children's schoolwork or upcoming holidays. She couldn't bring herself to burden him with her fears about Camilla's threats. The breaking point came on a gray December morning when the entire royal family was scheduled to attend the opening of a new wing at a prestigious London hospital. It was exactly the kind of engagement that Kate excelled at. Meeting patients, chatting with medical staff, and bringing attention to important healthcare initiatives. Kate had chosen her outfit carefully that morning, a sophisticated navy coat with pearl accessories that she felt struck the right balance between approachable and regal. She had spent extra time with her hair and makeup, knowing that the cameras would capture every detail. When she arrived at the hospital with William, the press was already assembled in large numbers. The opening was being covered by all the major news outlets, and Kate could see the familiar faces of royal correspondents who had followed her career for over a decade. King Charles and Queen Camilla arrived in a separate car, stepping out to their own barrage of camera flashes. Camilla looked resplendent in a burgundy coat with a matching hat, her confidence evident in every step she took toward the hospital entrance. The initial tour of the facility went smoothly. Kate found herself genuinely engaged with the patients they met, particularly the children in the pediatric ward. There was something about these interactions that reminded her why she had embraced royal life in the first place: the opportunity to make a real difference in people's lives. She was kneeling beside a young girl's bed, listening to the child describe her favorite books, when she felt the familiar presence of cameras nearby. The moment was perfect for the kind of heartwarming photograph that the public loved, and Kate was completely natural in these settings. "She's going to be a wonderful reader," Kate told the girl's mother, her smile genuine and warm. "You should be very proud." It was then that Camilla appeared at her side, having finished her own tour of the adult wards. The older woman's arrival shifted the dynamic immediately, as several photographers moved to capture both women together. "Catherine," Camilla said, her voice carrying that same tone Kate had learned to dread, "perhaps we should move along to the dedication ceremony." Kate nodded and began to stand, reaching out to steady herself on the bed rail as she rose from her kneeling position. It was a completely natural movement, the kind of small gesture she had made thousands of times during royal engagements. But before she could fully straighten up, Camilla's hand shot out and grabbed Kate's wrist with surprising force. The queen consort's fingers wrapped around Kate's arm just below her bracelet, her grip tight enough to leave marks. "Not like that," Camilla hissed, her voice low enough that the nearby patients couldn't hear, but loud enough for the photographers to sense drama. "You're not at home now." The criticism was sharp and unexpected, delivered with a coldness that made Kate's blood freeze. She tried to pull her hand free, but Camilla's grip tightened, her fingernails digging into Kate's skin through the fabric of her coat. "I was just," Kate began, but Camilla cut her off. "You were drawing attention to yourself," Camilla said, her eyes blazing with an intensity that shocked Kate. "This is not about you, Catherine. It never has been." The moment stretched out like an eternity. Kate could feel the cameras clicking around them, capturing every second of the interaction. She was acutely aware of the patients watching, their faces confused by the tension they could sense but not understand. William was at the other end of the ward, completely oblivious to what was happening. Kate caught a glimpse of him through the crowd, laughing at something a doctor had said. His face relaxed and happy. He had no idea that his wife was being humiliated just meters away. "Please," Kate whispered, still trying to free her hand from Camilla's grip. "You're hurting me." For a split second, something flickered across Camilla's face, perhaps surprise at her own actions, or maybe satisfaction at Kate's obvious distress. But the moment passed quickly, and the older woman's expression returned to its usual mask of royal composure. "Of course, dear," Camilla said, finally releasing Kate's wrist. "I was simply concerned about protocol. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings." Kate pulled her hand back, rubbing her wrist where Camilla's fingers had left red marks. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the adrenaline from the confrontation making her feel sick and shaky. The photographers had captured everything, though they couldn't have heard the words that were exchanged. To them, it might have looked like a simple moment of guidance from a senior royal to a junior one, but Kate knew better. This had been a public demonstration of power, a reminder of exactly where she stood in the royal hierarchy. "Are you all right?" asked Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the hospital director who had been guiding their tour. She had obviously sensed the tension in the air, though she was too polite to comment directly on what she had witnessed. "Perfectly fine," Kate managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. "Just excited to see the rest of the facility." The remainder of the hospital visit passed in a haze. Kate went through the motions of her royal duties, cutting ribbons and unveiling plaques, but she felt disconnected from everything around her. Her wrist throbbed where Camilla had grabbed her, a constant reminder of the humiliation she had just endured. Worse than the physical discomfort was the emotional impact. Kate had spent years building her confidence as a member of the royal family, learning to navigate the complex protocols and expectations that came with her position. In one moment, Camilla had stripped all of that away, reducing her to feeling like a scolded child. When they finally returned to their cars, Kate walked slightly behind the rest of the group, her head held high but her spirit crushed. She could see William ahead of her, still chatting easily with the hospital staff, completely unaware of what his stepmother had done to his wife. "Catherine," Camilla called out as they reached their vehicles, "I do hope you found today's visit educational." The comment was delivered with a smile that never reached Camilla's eyes, and Kate understood the message perfectly. This had been a lesson, a demonstration of what would happen if she continued to challenge the established order. "Very much so," Kate replied, her voice carefully controlled. "Thank you for your guidance." As she settled into the car beside William, Kate felt the full weight of her isolation. She couldn't tell her husband what had happened without seeming petty or vindictive. Who would believe that the queen consort had physically grabbed and humiliated her in front of patients and photographers? "You were wonderful with the children today," William said, reaching over to take her hand. "That little girl absolutely adored you." Kate flinched slightly as his fingers brushed over her injured wrist, but she managed to smile. "They were all so brave," she said, grateful that her voice didn't shake. "Are you sure you're feeling well?" William asked, studying her face with growing concern. "You seem pale." "Just tired," Kate lied, turning to look out the window as they pulled away from the hospital. It was an emotional day. That evening, Kate stood in front of her bathroom mirror, examining the bruises that had formed on her wrist where Camilla had grabbed her. The marks were clearly visible, dark purple against her pale skin, physical evidence of what had happened. She considered showing them to William, imagining how he would react to seeing proof that his stepmother had hurt his wife. But even as she thought about it, Kate knew she couldn't do it. The consequences would be devastating for the entire royal family, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that level of conflict. Instead, she covered the bruises with concealer and pulled on a long-sleeved nightgown. When William came to bed, she curled up beside him and pretended to be asleep, even as her mind raced with questions about what would happen next. The photographs from the hospital visit appeared in newspapers the following morning, but the captions focused on the successful opening and the royal family's commitment to healthcare. If any of the photographers had captured the moment of tension between Kate and Camilla, those images didn't make it into print. Kate studied the published photos over breakfast, looking for any sign of what she had experienced. There was one image that showed Camilla's hand on her arm, but to anyone who didn't know the context, it simply looked like a supportive gesture between family members. "The coverage looks positive," William commented, reading over her shoulder. "The hospital administrator sent a lovely thank you note this morning. She was particularly complimentary about your interactions with the patients." Kate nodded absently, still staring at the photograph that captured her humiliation. In the image, her face showed none of the shock and hurt she had felt. Years of royal training had taught her to maintain her composure no matter what, and that skill had served her well in this moment of crisis. But as she sat there in her kitchen, surrounded by the trappings of her privileged life, Kate had never felt more alone. The bruises on her wrist were healing, but the emotional wounds were just beginning to form. She had learned that her position in the royal family was more fragile than she had ever imagined, and that lesson would stay with her long after the physical evidence of the attack had faded. The worst part was the knowledge that this was probably just the beginning. Camilla had shown her hand now, revealed the depths of her resentment and her willingness to act on it. Kate knew that she would have to be more careful from now on, more aware of the dangers that lurked beneath the surface of royal life. As she prepared for another day of engagements, Kate made a silent promise to herself. She would not let Camilla break her spirit. No matter what tactics the older woman employed, the Princess of Wales had weathered storms before, and she would weather this one too. But she would have to do it largely alone, protecting her husband and children from the ugly realities of palace politics. The game had changed, and Kate was determined to survive it with her dignity intact. 3 months had passed since the hospital incident, and Kate had learned to live with a new reality. She moved through her royal duties with the same grace and professionalism as always, but there was a wariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She had become hyper-aware of Camilla's presence at every joint engagement, anticipating the next confrontation. The breaking point came at the annual Trooping the Color ceremony in June. It was one of the most important events on the royal calendar, celebrating the king's official birthday with a spectacular military parade. The entire family would be on display, standing on the balcony of Buckingham Palace as thousands of spectators and millions of television viewers watched around the world. Kate had been looking forward to the ceremony for weeks. It was one of the few occasions where she felt truly confident in her role, surrounded by the pageantry and tradition that she had grown to love. Her children were old enough now to appreciate the significance of the event, and she could see their excitement as they prepared for the day. The morning started perfectly. The weather was unusually bright for London, with clear skies that would showcase the ceremony beautifully. Kate wore a stunning white coat dress with a matching hat, an outfit that had been carefully chosen to photograph well against the red and gold backdrop of the palace. As the family gathered in the palace's Chinese dining room before the ceremony, the atmosphere was festive. Prince George was proudly wearing his first military-style outfit, while Princess Charlotte twirled in her pale blue dress. Even Prince Louis seemed to sense the importance of the occasion, staying unusually calm as his nanny adjusted his collar. William looked handsome in his ceremonial uniform, his medals catching the light from the ornate chandelier above. When he smiled at Kate across the room, she felt a moment of pure happiness. These were the moments that made all the challenges worthwhile. Seeing her family together, playing their part in an institution that had endured for over 1,000 years. King Charles was in excellent spirits, clearly enjoying his first Trooping the Color as monarch. He moved through the room greeting family members, his face animated as he discussed the details of the ceremony with his military aides. Even Camilla seemed relaxed, wearing an elegant powder blue ensemble that complemented her husband's uniform perfectly. But Kate had learned not to trust appearances where her stepmother-in-law was concerned. She noticed how Camilla's eyes tracked her movements around the room, how the older woman positioned herself to maintain visual contact at all times. It felt predatory, like being watched by a cat preparing to pounce. The family began moving toward the balcony as the ceremony reached its climax. The Royal Air Force flypast was scheduled to begin in just a few minutes, and the crowds below were growing restless with anticipation. Kate could hear the distant sound of military bands and the cheers of spectators who had been waiting for hours to catch a glimpse of the royal family. As they approached the famous balcony doors, Kate felt the familiar flutter of nerves that always preceded major public appearances. No matter how many times she had done this, the moment of stepping into public view still took her breath away. The knowledge that millions of people would be watching and judging every gesture was both thrilling and terrifying. The children were positioned at the front of the balcony, where their reactions to the flypast would delight the crowds below. Kate stood slightly behind them, ready to guide them through the traditional waving and ensure they behaved appropriately for the cameras. William was to her left, while King Charles and Camilla took their places at the center of the grouping. The first aircraft appeared as tiny dots on the horizon, growing larger as they approached the palace. The crowd below erupted in cheers, their enthusiasm infectious even from 5 stories above. Kate felt her own excitement building as she pointed out the different aircraft to her children. It was then that disaster struck. though it began so subtly that Kate didn't immediately recognize the danger. As the aircraft drew closer and the crowd's cheers reached a crescendo, Camilla moved slightly to her left, seemingly to get a better view of the approaching planes. The movement brought her directly into Kate's personal space, close enough that Kate could smell her stepmother-in-law's familiar perfume. For a moment, Kate thought nothing of it. The balcony was crowded, and small adjustments in position were normal during these events. But then Camilla's hand moved toward Kate's, which was resting on the balcony railing. Kate assumed it was another accidental contact, the kind of thing that happened when multiple people were trying to wave at the same time. She started to shift her own hand to give Camilla more room. Instead of moving away, however, Camilla's hand closed around Kate's wrist, with the same iron grip that Kate remembered from the hospital months earlier. The queen consort's fingers dug into the exact spot where the bruises had finally faded, sending a sharp pain shooting up Kate's arm. "Stay exactly where you are," Camilla whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise from the crowd below. "Don't you dare try to upstage me today." Kate tried to pull her hand free, but Camilla's grip only tightened. The older woman's fingernails bit into Kate's skin through her white gloves, and Kate had to bite her lip to keep from crying out in pain. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was being physically restrained, while thousands of people below believed they were watching a moment of family unity. "Please," Kate whispered back, her voice strained. "You're hurting me." "Good," Camilla replied, her smile never wavering, as she waved to the crowd with her free hand. "Maybe now you'll learn your place." The aircraft were directly overhead now, their engines drowning out any possibility of conversation. But Camilla didn't need words to communicate her message. Her grip on Kate's wrist was a clear statement of power and dominance, a reminder that despite all her popularity and success, Kate would always be at the mercy of those above her in the royal hierarchy. Kate looked desperately toward William, hoping he might notice her distress and intervene. But her husband was completely absorbed in pointing out aircraft to their children. His face turned upward toward the sky. Even if he had looked in her direction, the crowd noise would have made it impossible for him to hear her if she called out. The pain in her wrist was becoming unbearable. But Kate knew she couldn't make a scene. Not here. Not with millions of people watching and dozens of cameras recording every moment. She was trapped between her desire to defend herself and her responsibility to maintain the dignity of the monarchy. As the final aircraft passed overhead and began to disappear into the distance, Kate thought her ordeal was finally over. But Camilla had one more humiliation in store for her. As the family began to step back from the balcony rail, the queen consort suddenly yanked Kate's hand away from the railing with such force that Kate stumbled backward. The movement was sharp and violent, completely at odds with the celebratory atmosphere of the moment. Kate's hat shifted slightly as she struggled to regain her balance, and she could feel several strands of hair falling loose from her carefully arranged style. But the worst part was what came next. As Kate stumbled, Camilla released her grip so suddenly that Kate's hand flew backward, striking her own chest with enough force to leave a mark. To anyone watching, it might have looked like Kate had simply been clumsy or overwhelmed by emotion. "How unfortunate," Camilla said quietly, her voice dripping with false concern. "You really should be more careful, Catherine. People are watching." Kate stood frozen in shock, her hand still throbbing from the assault. Around her, the other family members were chatting happily about the successful ceremony, completely unaware of what had just transpired. The children were bubbling over with excitement about the aircraft, their innocent joy a stark contrast to the ugliness Kate had just experienced. William finally turned toward her, his face glowing with happiness from the shared family moment. "Wasn't that magnificent?" he said, reaching for her hand. "The children absolutely loved it." Kate flinched as his fingers brushed over her injured wrist, but she managed to smile and nod. "It was beautiful," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "They'll remember this forever." As they began to move back into the palace, Kate caught sight of herself in one of the ornate mirrors lining the corridor. Her appearance was still largely intact, though her hat sat slightly askew and there were small signs of distress that only she would notice. But her eyes told the real story. They held a haunted quality that spoke of trauma and betrayal. The rest of the day passed in a blur of official photographs and formal luncheons. Kate went through the motions with her usual professionalism, but inside she was crumbling. The public humiliation had been bad enough, but the knowledge that it had happened in front of her children made it infinitely worse. That evening, as she helped put the children to bed, Kate listened to their excited chatter about the day's events. They had no idea that their mother had been attacked just feet away from them, that the unity and happiness they had witnessed was largely an illusion. "Mama, why did Great Aunt Camilla grab your hand like that?" Princess Charlotte asked innocently as Kate tucked her in. Kate's blood turned to ice. If a 7-year-old had noticed the interaction, how many others had seen it? How many photographers had captured the moment when Camilla yanked her hand away? "Sometimes grown-ups have to help each other during big ceremonies," Kate said carefully, trying to keep her voice light. "It can be confusing up there with all the noise and excitement." Charlotte seemed satisfied with this explanation and soon drifted off to sleep. But Kate lay awake for hours that night, staring at the ceiling and wondering how much more she could endure. The bruises on her wrist were already forming again, dark purple marks that would take weeks to heal. In the morning, the newspapers were full of glowing coverage of the ceremony. The photographs showed a picture-perfect royal family celebrating together, with no hint of the violence that had occurred just out of camera range. There was one image that showed Camilla's hand on Kate's arm, but the caption described it as a touching moment of support between the Queen Consort and the Princess of Wales. William read the coverage over breakfast, completely unaware of the irony in the headlines. "The photographer really captured some beautiful family moments," he said, showing Kate a particularly striking image of the children watching the fly past. Kate nodded and smiled, playing her part perfectly. But inside, she was making a decision. She couldn't continue to endure these attacks in silence. Camilla's behavior was escalating, becoming bolder and more public. It was only a matter of time before someone else noticed, before the carefully constructed facade of royal family harmony began to crack. The question was what to do about it. Kate knew that any direct confrontation would be seen as an attack on the monarchy itself, but she also knew that she couldn't protect her children from this toxic environment if she didn't find a way to fight back. As she sat in her beautiful home, surrounded by luxury and privilege, Kate had never felt more trapped. The golden cage of royal life was closing around her, and she was running out of options. But she was also discovering reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. The girl from Berkshire who had once seemed so out of place in royal circles was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned to navigate the dangerous currents of palace politics. She had been tested and broken, but she was not defeated. The real battle for her place in the royal family was just beginning, and Kate was finally ready to fight. The bruises would heal, but the memory of this day would stay with her forever. It was the day she learned that sometimes the greatest threat comes not from outside enemies, but from those closest to the throne. And it was the day she decided that she would not go quietly into the background, no matter what forces were arrayed against her.